Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss about macroprocessor algorithm and data structure. See, last class we discussed about macros and then macroprocessor and then with an example how this macroprocessor is working. First of all, here as we know that macro is nothing but it represents a group of statements in the source programming language. Macro, it is used to represent a group of statements in the source programming language. Then macroprocessor, it will replaces each and every macro instruction to the corresponding group of source language statements. This entire process called as expanding the macros. Here, what is this macroprocessor algorithm and then data structure? See, it is easy to design a two-pass a macroprocessor in which all macro definitions are processed during the first pass, and all macro invocation statements are expanding the second pass. As we know that first is initially it will go into, according to the macroprocessor concept, it will take the things and then replaces each and every macro instruction based on a group of source language statements. This entire process we can call it as expanding the things. Like that, here it is very easy to build a two macro processor. That is, all macro definitions are processed during the first pass. Initially, first pass, all the macro definitions are processed under a single pass. Then all macro invocation statements are expanding the second pass, expanding during the second pass. Macro invocation is nothing but here whenever you want to call certain kinds of sub functions, those things will be going to execute like done under second pass. Then here two pass macro processor would not allow the body of one macro instruction to contain definitions of other macros. What is this meaning of this particular definition means? Here all the macros would have to define during the first pass before any macro invocations were expanded, because it will not allow the body of the one macro instruction to contain definition of other macro, because it will allow only the things are defined during the first pass before any macro invocation. For according to these definitions, initially first pass it will going to define the definitions of like a macro definition. Those information will be processed under first pass. Then once we done all these things, second pass, if I can consider second pass concentrating only macro invocations. That's why in that a two pass macro processor would not allow the body of the one macro instruction to contain definitions of other macros. It will allow only macro invocation first before macro invocation, macro call, like it will going to allow the macro definition. That's why it will not going to allow the entire body of the one macro instruction to contain definitions of other macros. Here such definitions of macro by other macro figure, according to this particular information, we have macro and defines SIC standard version macros. According to this particular figure, the body of the first macro, that is macro S, under that first line macro S, macros, contains statements that define read buff and then write buff. This particular, you might have observing here, we have a sub function like read buff and then write buff. The things are present under that label field here, macros, read buff and then write buff. It will define the body of the first macro, that is macro contains the statement like read buff and write buff. These two things can act as a like a sub functions. See, this particular entire figure, like whatever the instruction we are facing, this is belongs to SIC machine system. Then this particular figure, whatever the information we are observing here, the body of the second macro, that is macro X, obviously this is entire thing can be called as the body of the macro X defines the same macros of read buff and then write buff. These entire instructions belongs to SIC bar XC system. You might observing why these things we need means, for example, if you want to execute like SIC machine instruction and SIC XC machine instruction, you need to follow these particular kinds of instruction. Like instead of a macro X, if you preferred macros, then that particular instruction, the entire instruction belongs to SIC system. Instead of macros, you used macro X, that particular instruction belongs to SIC bar XC system. Then again, macroprocessor algorithm and data structure. Here, one pass macroprocessor that can alternate between macro definition and macro expansion. Here, the definition of macro must appear in the source program before any statements that invoke the macro. So as I told that according to that pass 1, it will going to concentrate only definitions of the macro, then pass 2 concentrates invocation. Like that, definition of a macro must appear in the source program before any statement that invoke that macro. It will going to apply, like it will going to allow only the definitions of macro in first pass, then second pass concentrates invocation. It will not, second pass will not going to concentrate like definitions. Whenever the things are appeared in first pass, then only it will go to concentrate, like it will going to call that particular functions. See, this is inconvenience of the programmer. Whenever we called before macros, before definition of macros, if he called macro invocation, if he used macro invocation is nothing but calling a sub like functions. If he called that, means obviously there is a little bit variation, so that will confuse us the program. That is slight inconvenience of the programmer. Macro definitions are stored in definition table. Definition table is used to store the macro or definitions. Then again, comment lines are not entered into the definition table. The macro names are entered into name table. Name table contains 2 pointers to the beginning and the end of the definition in definition table. The third data structure is an argument table, which is used during the expansion of the macro invocation. See, as we know that like definition table is used to contains stores definitions, and it will not going to allow comment line. Then again, name table, it contains like it uses data structure information to show how the things are storing in particular definition table with the help of a name table. Then again, third data structure, argument table, that is used whenever the expansion is done, when used during the expansion of the macro invocation. At the time of expansion, we are preferring argument table. The arguments are stored in argument table according to their positions in the argument list. See here, according to the figure, upcoming slide will discuss how these parameters ampersand indev tends to argument to 1, parameter buffer address tends to argument 2. Figure 4.4 shows the positions of the contents of these tables during the processing, how the informations are storing one table to another table. We'll discuss later further slides. Here, when the question mark n notations is recognized in a line form definition table, a simple indexing operation supplies the proper argument from argument table. According to this particular figure, this shows the definition of read buff. Definition of read buff. See, as I told that definition name table contains the information about like whatever the sub function you are preferred. This particular figure, definition of read buff stored in definition table with an entry in name table. As you might have observing here, there are 2 pointers. Initially, whatever the information belongs to read buff, that will be storing under definitions table. Initially, we have the first pointer symbol, that first arrow symbol shows the read buff, ampersand indev, ampersand buff address, ampersand record length. the things are entering from name table. That first pointer, I mean first symbol, that shows the information about read buff. The thing is stored under definition table with the help of first pointer, with the help of name table. Enter in name table in identifying the beginning and end of the definition. There are two pointer symbol. You might observe there are two arrows. First, initially the things will going to begin. Second pointer will going to end the thing here. That's why we preferred two arrows here. See, after that, whatever the information we added under the definition table, you might have observed here read buff, ampersand index, again buffer address, record length. This uses ampersand index has been converted. This ampersand index, buffer address, record length can act as a parameter for that particular read buff. Ampersand index has been converted to question mark 1. That indicates first parameter in the prototype, and then buff address has been converted to 2 and record length converted to 3. This shows the parameters that belongs to that particular prototype. Then argument table, you might observe here whatever the information we used, that will be storing under that f1 buffer and then length. F1 belongs to first parameter, and then buffer address, that is second, and then record length of that particular information. This is about information about your name table, argument table, and then definition table. How the things are storing from one thing to another thing. Then again, the macro processor algorithm itself is presented in figure. The procedure processing, the procedure define called when the beginning of a macro definition is recognized. It makes the appropriate entries in definition table and the name table. As I told that according to that previous figure, with that name table we are going to define the information about whatever the subfunction we used, that will be storing under that define table with the help of a name table with the help of a pointer symbols. The procedure expand call to set up the arguments values in argument table and expand a macro invocation statement. Expanding is nothing but whenever the things are stored with the help of macro. Macro is nothing but it is used to store the group of statements. A group of statements in the source programming languages. Macro processor, it will going to expand, like it will going to replaces each and every macro instruction corresponding to the group of statements in the source programming language. This entire process is called as expanding. The procedure get line called at several points in the algorithm gets the next line to be processed. Get line is nothing but as the information, as the content says that if you want a new line, like next line means obviously you are preferring get line to get the information, new information. Expanding is set to true or false. Here expanding uses boolean values, that is true or false content. See, according to that initially we need to begin. Here expanding, as I told that expanding prefers boolean values, that is false and true conditions. Whenever while opcode is not equals to end, then obviously we need to begin from that. Get line, process line, end while, and macro processor. Here whenever the control reaches to process line, it will go into that particular information, that is procedure process line. Begin, it will going to search the name table for opcode. Name table for opcode, whatever the information we have under that name table, it will going to search it. If it is found, then it will going to expand. Expand is nothing but it will going to call that particular information for the purpose of further execution. If found, then expand. Else if opcode equals to macro, then define. If it is macro, then we need to define that information. Else write source line to expanded file and process line. Procedure define begin, enter macro name into name table. As I told that enter macro name into name table. Previous figure we observed that with the help of name table we are storing the information from a name table to definition table, like that. Enter macro name into name table, enter macro prototype into definition table, whatever the macro prototype, like whatever the parameters, that will be converted to 1, 2, 3, whatever the parameters we preferred under that given instructions, like ampersand indev, ampersand buffer address, ampersand record length. Those things will be converted to macro prototype. Level equals to 1, while level greater than 0, do begin get line. If this is not a comment line, then begin substitute positional notation for parameters. As I told that positional notation is nothing but first position, second position, then third position. We need to set like that, like 1, 2, 3 for those parameters. Enter line into definition table. If opcode equals to macro, then we need to increase the count. Level equals to level plus 1. Else if opcode equals to amend, obviously we need to decrease the count because the things are reached to the end of the program. That's why we need to decrease the thing. Level equals to level minus 1. And if not, comment. And while store in name table pointers to beginning and the end of the definition. This is about define macros. Procedure expand. If you want to expanding the thing, means obviously begin expanding. Here we are preferring like boolean values, that is true case. Get first line of macro definitions from definition table. Set up arguments from macro invocation in argument table. See, according to that previous figure, you might have observed here f1, then macro buffer, then again record length. Then we need to set those things, whatever the information we preferred under that definition table, that will be setting under argument table based on expansion. Whenever we set the value 1, 2, 3 like that, we need to use those things under argument table. Write a macro invocation to expand file as comment. While not end of macro definitions, we need to begin from that. Obviously get line to get the information, process line. And while expanding, if it is expanding false, if the things are not called properly, like obviously if the things are not expanded, then set the false case over there and expand. Procedure get line. Begin if expanding, then begin get next line of macro definition from definition table. Substitute arguments from argument table for positional notations. And if else read next line from input file, otherwise end get line. This is about how the things are expanding, how the things are getting, how the things are processed based on your particular macro algorithm. Here macro algorithm, macro procedure algorithm and dot structure. Like this, your things are expanding, your things are getting, your things are storing from definition table to name table to argument table. Remaining things we'll discuss tomorrow. Thank you.